Serious people who have found a secret room or space in their house. How long did you live in the house before you found it? And what was in it? What was the eventual outcome of finding the room? I found a secret space in my closet when my mom and I were moving out of the house she was renting to move into my stepdad's house. I never noticed it because junk covered the section of the wall that was covering a small entrance to a room that was sealed off with boards and plywood. I couldn't pry it open, but I could see light shining in it and a single mason jar filled with what I assumed was water. The air was cold in there, like as if the central heating didn't even reach that part. I showed it to my mom and she told me that she doesn't remember seeing that there when we had moved in 8 years prior. But since we were moving out, it didn't matter. The room gave me the creeps for whatever reason. I know why it was sealed off, or why there was a single mason jar filled with water in the center of the room. My parents bought a house from an old family member to help her pay for nursing home care. She hadn't lived in the house for years at that point. She was a hoarder and we were tasked with cleaning up the house over the course of a summer in order to make it livable prior to the start of school. Rat carcasses fused to the carpet, old tax documents from the 60s, etc. Well, we were scraping up the linoleum tiling, covering the original hardwood floor, disappointingly enough, in a side room, when I made the joke about the previous resident being a secret mass murderer and that there was a trapdoor under the linoleum full of dead bodies. I pulled up a huge section of tiling only to find a trapdoor underneath. Scared the shit out of me, but when we finally built up enough courage to open the damned thing, we discovered there was nothing under there. It was a walled off section of the basement with a dirt floor. We suspected was an old root cellar from back when farmers had to store their shit in a cold, dark place to prevent it from spoiling. We moved into a house with a door in the kitchen that could not be opened. The real estate tried but failed, assumed it led to the laundry room, but was walled off. My older siblings, like any typical teenagers, were not convinced of this and were determined to open it. It was just a normal pantry, but they never told our mother they managed to open it and used it to hide things from her like alcohol, smokes, and weed. Watched Home Alone and saw that attic that Macaulay Culkin was staying in and wondered if we had one in our townhouse. Ran around with a stepladder until I found it in my mum's closet. Got on my tiptoes on the stepladder and fought the door open. Ended up being a big piece of plywood and peered into the attic. A mouse colony stared back. It was like that scene in Ratatouille. Decades worth of fesses covered the whole space. My mom was not happy once I told her. We moved shortly after. Lived in a warehouse in Melbourne. Always thought it would be cool to get on the roof, but there was no access. After about 6 months, I'm standing in front of mirror upstairs when I notice it has hinges. I push on it, it clicks and opens out, revealing a small attic and roof hatch. That was pretty cool. Used to sit up there and watch the sunset over the city. When clearing out my grandma's house, I found a small door in the wall of the basement that led to a tiny room. According to my mother, that's where they hid the family heirlooms when thieving relatives came to town. I was mostly interested in the fact that it was covered in scribbles from my mom and her sisters growing up. A couple of years ago I rented an apartment that was in a massive old architecture style building. No idea how old it was. I remember when I did the showing they showed me a door that had an elaborate staircase that went straight up to the ceiling and explained that it went to the attic, which was sealed up. When I was finally moving out, curiosity got the best of me and I pushed on the panel at the top of the stairs until it popped open and hoisted myself up there. It was completely dark and the floor was covered in at least an inch of dust, and I found that it was an entire extra floor to my unit. There was some old rotting furniture and magazines littered throughout the rooms. I eventually found a small hole in one of the walls that went into the sealed off upstairs of the unit next to mine and decided to go through that one too. I found a smaller hole at the back end of that area that led to the next one. I eventually made my way through about 5 or 6 of these sealed off spaces that had no entrances save these small holes in drywall. The farther I went in, the older the furniture I found. Fridges from the 50s or earlier, old dishware, and so much dust over everything. The last unit was the most interesting. Hand painted scenes on the walls and holes to the attic letting sunlight stream in. I took small videos, but they are all on Snapchat, so they are hard to post. I must have been up there for hours just exploring alone in the dark. I was pretty lucky to have the only room with access up there. Edit. Album. Sorry for the format/captions, no idea why I decided video was the way to go. It wasn't a room, but after living in our house for a few years, we decided to remodel the basement bathroom. Tore out the old shower enclosure and found a window behind it. Said window was covered on the outside by an apron of siding that came from the cantilevered room upstairs all the way down to the concrete pad. We tore off the siding apron and let some light in. It was much better. Back in college, some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s from an elderly lady. The place was falling apart, but it was huge and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there, I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost my balance, reaching out to steady myself using one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected, and after some inspection I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the hole, maybe a 2-foot diameter circle out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it, I got the courage to creep a little closer and peer down into it. There was another room roughly the same size but deep, maybe 15 feet down, and mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight down into it, and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tear open climb down for a closer look. Especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for, scattered around the hole, as if something had broken out. At the risk of my account being discovered by my Redditor friends, this was in Pittsburgh. We did a little research and think the sub-basement may have been related to Prohibition, but honestly I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares. Helping my granddad move house, we accidentally found access to the underfloor area, not even big enough to really call a crawl space I don't think. Spotty memory. There was a small pile of trash from the 60s/70s. Juice cans, chocolate bar wrappers and crumpled newspapers, and bits of discarded construction debris and some broken tools. We think it must have been used by the builders in lieu of a trash can. It was cool, an accidental time capsule. It was about a year into owning our house. We actually found 2 secret rooms. One was just a room under the stairs that was closed off. Had some toys from the 70s in it. The really crazy one was when we redid the insulation in our attic. One of the workers asked if I knew there was a room up there. I had no idea, so we cut open the drywall and there were stacks on stacks of boxes from the 60s. Like a ton of boxes. And they were all full. So I opened them up expecting some cool stuff. And they were full of freaking pine cones. One of the bigger bummers of my life. Moved into an 18th century farmhouse as a little kid and found a small panel door in the back of the large closet in my small room. Turned out to be a small finished room over the eaves that had a small portal window. I spent hours in that room reading and hiding from the world. There was a hidden door behind the wallpaper. Obviously the door knob was taken off, so it blends in with the wall. In the hallway. We lived in this house for 6 years, and I found out about this door 2 years ago. When we opened it, we saw a skeleton in the corner. Not gonna lie, that scared me shitless, although it was just a prop left by the past owners of our house. While installing Cat 5e network cables many years ago in my house, I discovered a short and squat, cast iron water heater inside some walls, around a staircase and bathroom, connecting the basement and the next level of the house. I'm guessing whoever did the remodel didn't think the little bit of space that could be reclaimed was worth it. I found it when I realized my measurements weren't making sense and couldn't figure out why I wasn't seeing my Ethernet cable. I had to plot everything out carefully because of the split level nature of my house, the crawl space, the basement, etc. and figured out there was 3 feet of space unaccounted for. It will probably be removed when we remodel the basement bathroom. I figure I can either get more storage space or a full bathtub instead of just the shower stall that is there now. There was a small door under some stairs, almost like Harry Potter's room, in my old apartment in Venezuela. We'd lived there for a year, until I leaned on it, and felt it wiggle a little, and realized it was a small square door. I was too scared to open it, so had my dad do it, and about 20 or so cockroaches flooded out. Never have I felt so much panic. Growing up, my dad's hoarding was pretty bad and my childhood home was pretty old. Around my preteens I started trying to navigate through the clutter to parts of the house I truly had never seen because of all the junk. I found this door that had been blocked off, and I eventually moved stuff around enough that I could open the door, which was hard because the room was big, but he filled it so much the only way to navigate it was a single narrow path. Behind the door was trippy to me as a kid because the back couple of rooms of the house were rotted out and collapsed in places, so my parents just blocked it off, I guess. Going from my packed house to this completely empty collapsing ruins was actually really interesting to me. I used to try and navigate through it till one day I fell through the floor and landed underneath the house with my head a couple inches from a nail pointed up from the ground. I don't remember if I ever went back through the door after that. Not necessarily secret, but my old house was a duplex. There was a hobbit-sized door on the bottom floor and I glanced in there a few times, but only saw pipes and different electrical units and stuff. There was some of the landlord/maybe past residents' junk in the corner. After a few years I explored behind it and realized it leads to the other half of the house. Half the attic is walled off from renovations from one of the previous owners. I can't seem to convince my dad to let me cut a piece of the drywall out to look inside. This house is from the 1920s, which is rather old for New Zealand. It would be a rather large space, about the size of our kitchen. Edit. He said no and told you all to fuck off, but I'm gonna look at it tomorrow anyway. Hopefully it's not empty. Wish me luck. Edit 2. Wow guys, I didn't expect such a response. Okay, so it's morning right now, and I'm finally alone in the house. I've spent the last few minutes gouging an inch-wide hole in the drywall and it's darker than Van to black in there. My flashlight just isn't powerful enough. Should I buy a glow stick or something, or risk making the hole bigger? Also, answers to common questions. I'm female. I live in Auckland. The space is above the lounge, so definitely no ways to get in. It's probably the oldest house in the suburb, which has connections to a prominent land war in NZ. We bought a house that had been built in the 1880s, lived in it for 7 years, and then had to have some wiring work done. The electrician was working down in the basement and wanted to drill through a brick wall to the outside for some reason I no longer remember. We give him the okay and go about our business. He starts drilling and then stops, comes upstairs and tells us he just found a bricked up room. And what do we want to do about it? Well, we kind of still want our wiring situation taken care of, but if there's a body and some amontadillo in there, I definitely want to know. On the other hand, I don't want to let my sister's boyfriend knock the wall down with a sledgehammer. As we are discussing this, the electrician offers to run a scope through the hole he just drilled, so we can take a look without doing more damage, or, as he put it, destroying evidence. So our new friend gets his scope set up, and we all go down to the basement and watch the monitor. It's a very small space, maybe 3 by 5 feet. Nothing in there, but a really old, gross looking plushie. Not a teddy bear, maybe a dog. It was sewed out of some kind of patent fabric in a vaguely dog-like shape. That's it, nothing else. Electrician asks us what we want to do. I ask Kate if he can seal the hole he just drilled, because this is definitely how ghost movies start. He agreed and patched it up, drilled somewhere else, finished the rewiring, and we all continued our lives. We moved out 2 years later, and as far as I know, Haunted Doggy is still bricked up in the basement of that house. Hidden closet in basement wall. After 20 years of living in the house, we found some personal documents of no real interest, a newspaper from the day after Pearl Harbor, and a hand-drawn cartoon of a pregnant Lucy yelling, "God damn it, Charlie Brown." Update, as promised. Well, I only half remembered things, but as promised, here is what we found. The newspaper turned out to be a reprint, so not valuable, but still fun to look through. The cartoon is just as I remembered. Goes to show what I find important. but I had completely forgotten about the photo album. I'm going to try and track these people down and return their memories. Thanks for poking at me to dig this stuff up. I went to visit my grandparents a few months after they had moved into a new house out in the country. I got into a bit of horseplay with a cousin and got shoved into a wall. It broke a big hole and we realized there was a large empty space back there. With grandpa's help we tore the wall down and found a little room full of planting trays and grow lamps. There were a number of books about horticulture and one specifically about growing marijuana. There was no secret way in as far as we could tell. Someone had just walled the entire room off for some reason. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and comment below your stories to be part of a future video.